Well, here's a rather challenging request that came in. Could you do a video on the benefits and the cons of the Munsell color chart? Yeah, because volumes and volumes have been written about that. It's really complex. Let's see if we can simplify it. I think one of the best ways to explain the Munsells system, or at least give a simple explanation, perhaps is understandable, is to compare it with our traditional system. And so, but in doing that, I want to show you a little bit about how both systems evolved. Now, the color wheel as we know it today, the idea of putting hues in a circle, as far as we know, originated with Isaac Newton around 1665. And I think this is probably as close as we can find to how Newton first arranged colors. He threw light through a prism, you've heard that story before, and saw those divisions of color and saw how the colors took on identities, and one color mixed with the one next to it and so on. And he envisioned how that worked in a circle, and it really does work in a circle. And so that color wheel evolved into the traditional color wheel we know today, the 12-hue color wheel that so many of us rely on today. So that's how the circular idea of a color wheel evolved. 300 years later, Munsell wanted to find a way to create a notation of what colors actually do. Now, the Newton and the traditional system only show, the wheel itself only show the relationship of color. They don't show the values, and they don't show the changes in saturation, or what some call chroma. Munsell called chroma, and some call the intensity. The actual wheel itself, the arrangement of the colors, don't show that. So Munsell's intention was to come up with a system that would create a notation for each individual color, so that with a series of letters and numbers, a set of letters and numbers, you could indicate every color possible. And so that was the original. You can see volumes has been written about this, and I'm going to try to simplify it for you. And one way I want to simplify it is by first of all showing you you might call this his original diagram of how the system would work. And then we begin, right there we have to compare the two systems. One comparison is that the traditional wheel is based on 3 primaries, red, yellow, and blue. Munsell developed a system where there are 5 primaries, red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And we might notice the difference in the language. He uses the word purple, which I use an awful lot, whereas in the traditional wheel, and I think even back into Newton, the word violet was used. They're interchangeable, but I think I was asked that question one time, what's the difference between purple and violet? None. It's just the two names for the same thing. All right, so back to this. Munsell wanted to show a diagram that would create a number for each of the colors we see. And the way he divided that on the wheel, we can see it right here, the way he divided that was that each of the primary numbers he registered, by the way, he created 100, a system that identifies 100 hues, and he divided those into increments of 10. And so where the color red, for example, where it stops being red right over here and becomes red-purple, there are 10 degrees between that, but it really stops, the 10 stops at the point where he could identify a color as being no longer red purple, but it becomes red. And then he set it on the wheel so the actual red itself sits on 5. So that you'll find that all the primaries sit on his number 5. I know that sounds complex, and I think it's complex too, but that was the way he divided that system, or divided the hues, so that it would fit into a system of notation. Then one thing that he did that doesn't happen here on either Newton or the traditional wheel, he left out the color orange so that I don't know whether he left it out so it would fit. He calls the orange, here it's red, yellow, and then it becomes yellow, red. I mean red, yellow, red. Then it becomes yellow, red, and yellow, red, yellow. So those are his degrees. By the numbers of times the letter appears for the color, they get indicated in this little system right here. So red appears as R. Red, as it begins to lean towards orange, becomes red hyphen yellow, red. And then it becomes yellow, red, and so on. And that kind of letter notation he gives all the way through. So you can see that his system then, another way they are different, is that Munsells' system is mathematical, whereas the Newton system was based on observation of how the colors develop in the prism. All right, now, another way, one way they're similar, let me just take this down. Oh, first of all, I want to explain one other thing to you before I go and talk about similarities and differences. So we'll just take these charts away and talk. Let me expand on that concept of notation. Munsell developed this diagram where he could show hue, value, and chroma, he called. Now I'm talking about saturation when I say the word chroma. So he developed kind of a three-dimensional diagram where we have the hues as they move in the circular form. So this is the top dimension. And then we have their different, each hue's different value at its highest intensity as it evolves towards the center. And then we have each of those, the value of the hue, and moving in this direction, which is in this section, and then moving in this direction is the various degrees of saturation. So that's what he wanted to show, and he wanted his notation system to indicate each one of these little blocks, and it actually does. Now, let's talk about their similarities and their differences. And before I go into the total similarities and differences, one of the main differences in the Munsells system and the traditional system is that Munsells system mixes gray with the saturated hue to reduce the intensity, as we see right here. So you see these are, the neutral comes down here, and then the gray added into the saturated color then takes it into its various degrees of saturation all the way up to the full saturation. So you can see there's a little bit of it gets a little thick right there, where he's trying to show the hues as they're arranged on the wheel, as he has them subdivided and so on. And he's trying to show each hue at its various value level. And then he's trying to show that combination of the hue, the value, and the intensity, showing the chroma at this value level here. And so the notation that he left then included the hue as its number, as I explained before, and then the value of that hue, and he had a number for the value, and the saturation of that hue, and he has a number for the saturation. So you see, it's all mathematical. Now, let's take these away, and let's look at the two wheels together. The wheel itself, the color wheel, or you might say the hue wheel itself. This is the traditional wheel, and this is the Munsell wheel, and this is a truncated version of the Munsell wheel. the actual wheel, if you can imagine 100 of these moving around in a circle. But this is a truncated version. This only includes the 5 and the 10 of each of those hues he identified. So the similarities are you might say what they do that is exactly alike. They both use the same hue names, use the traditional hue names that we use to identify hue: yellow, red, blue, and green. He doesn't use orange, but this one uses the term orange. So we have yellow, green, blue, violet or purple, red, and orange that we use in the traditional wheel. The words we use to identify the color. And in his wheel, he uses just the 5 as, but then they are also the same in the resulting colors don't change. You cannot tell if you have 2 paintings hanging side by side. One is done with the Munsells system and one's done using the traditional system. You can't identify which one was done with which system. The results ends up being the same. It's a matter of artistic choice as to which system an artist will use. However, I'm going to expand on this just a little bit. The benefit of the Munsells system has been to the color industry. And not only the color industry, but the soil industry and a medical industry. There are other industries now that can use his system to identify colors. His system is used to identify testing soil, the various colors that their little test results will appear in when soil is tested, and on and on. So his work was a great benefit to the science community and to the industrial community. But then, from my viewpoint, it stops there. I find that the traditional system is of more benefit to the artist, although any artist can gain a deeper understanding of the color by studying Munsells system and studying exactly what's going on there. But if you don't have a tendency towards mathematics, you might find it very confusing. All right, so there are 2 ways they're the same. This person asked for cons and pros and cons. So I'm just going to do similarities and differences, and then I'll tell you my pros and cons because they may be different from other people's. So I've told you the similarities. Their results are the same, and they use the same hue names. Now we'll make that little distinction there because you see these days appearing on some color wheels. You'll see the word cyan, you'll see the words magenta. Those are results of what we do here. And so those would not be really traditional hue names. They are hue names they're names that describe hues. For example, magenta is a red-violet. Cyan is a blue-green, or green-blue, however you want to identify that. All right, so I hope now, that was pretty long and maybe a little convoluted, but I hope that gives you an idea of how we can look at those 2. Now let's look at how they're different and what I see as the advantages of one over the other for the painter. All right, one of the differences is that the traditional system is intuitive. We use it intuitively based on what we know that color does to color. The Munsells system is based on mathematics, what you learn about the combinations and how these various combinations work. I want to go back into what I mean by intuitive. Munsell was one of the first ones to really emphasize, not the first, because the emphasis of the 3 parts of color goes back much further. But he put it into a formula. The 3 parts of color that I keep trying to drive home, those 3 components of color that are equally important to every single color you mix, and that is what is the hue of the color, what is the value of the color, and what is the saturation, called chroma, called intensity. Understanding how color produces those 3 things is what the painter does. It's what the painter is working with. And when I say this is intuitive, I mean that on the wheel itself we don't see value. On the wheel itself we don't see intensity. Usually when we see a color wheel, we only see the highest intensity of each of the hues that are on the wheel. And the same thing is true for this wheel of the Munsells system. Now, if you're looking at the diagram, a three-dimensional diagram of the color chart, he tries to show you all three of those at work together. But the difficulty there is you can never see the complete story, because you can ever at one time in a two-dimensional picture see one segment as far as the intensity goes, to be able to see the changes in intensity, the changes in value, and the changes in hue, or the differences in hues. You need to see a slice of every single segment. And you see the difficulty there in trying to diagram that three-dimensionally and being able to work intuitively with it. Now, what do you need to, let me go into the other things. And then the other thing in which they're different, I pointed out, is that Munsell used the system of five, what he called, five primaries. That simply means those are the colors, from his point of view, those are the colors to which with which all the others are formed. The traditional wheel uses just those three, of yellow, blue, and red. And one reason I prefer the traditional wheel is that with that system, we have arranged on the traditional wheel their relationship to each other, what they do to each other, which this wheel does not do. These are not arranged so that they completely neutralize each other on this wheel. There is some neutralization, but they're not arranged necessarily so that these will always completely neutralize each other. One example here is the red is right across blue-green. Now, in some cases where they may accidentally bump into each other, like yellow to purple there, but the whole wheel is not arranged that way. The wheel is arranged to be able to form those notations. This wheel is arranged that way. Now, this is the traditional wheel that grew out of Newton's system. It's not the same wheel that Newton originally created, but it's been refined over time, over the 300 years. And so the way this wheel works, you can see it. We can see the relationship with every single color when it's arranged in these 12 places like this. Every color is opposite its complement. And so these two are going to neutralize each other. When they register their exact hue, they're going to neutralize each other. No matter which two you point to here, they're going to neutralize each other. Now, one tiny exception there are the tertiary colors, which will neutralize each other, but will have a little bit of a leaning towards whatever colors they have in common. For example, we have in the tertiaries, we have two sets of complements. We have red against green, and then we have orange against blue. You mix those together, and you see that we have the red-orange over here, and it has the yellow in it. The orange has the yellow in it. Have the blue-green over here that also has yellow in it. We have to have a yellow to be able to get the green. And so when we mix those two together, they're going to get neutral, but it's going to be a warm neutral. That's the, when you mix the tertiaries, you're always going to have that kind of a little thingy going on. So, see, I'm trying to, I was going not to get too deep, but I think I am getting too deep into that. But the important thing to emphasize is that we can use any time on a wheel like this, we can just refer to it and find the complements, the colors that are going to neutralize each other. And also, because of their relationship and their positions on the wheel, we know that the colors beside the complements will neutralize also the complement to a degree. And so we can work with that. This also allows us to create schemes, color schemes, by their relationship. We can create triad schemes. There's an earlier quick tip on triad schemes where we choose three colors that have a relationship on the color wheel, when mixed together, are going to keep color harmony. So that's, in my experience, this is a much more intuitive and functional wheel to work from than this one is, simply because on this one we don't have that kind of relationship. The other ways that they are Okay, there are three ways then. Let me just say if that's what there are three ways then, which they are so different. Where Munsell works better in industry, works great, works beautiful. That little notation, but the traditional wheel works better for the painter. So remember, the traditional wheel is more intuitive. That means it has all these possibilities. Oh, I forgot the value part of it. We have on the color wheel, we in our tube colors, we'll have a darkest dark for almost the ability to darken anything that we have listed, any hue that's on the wheel there. And because hue behaves the way it does, as a hue goes darker and darker and darker, means it's not getting as much light. We can mix that complement into it, that darker complement opposite, and mix it into it, and we can get that dark, and that works just fine to give us the value that we need. So we got the ability then to use the dark of complements to give us the values we need. Of course, we use white either way to get the lights we need. Okay, so that's the difference: mathematical versus intuitive. But both of them require that you have to learn stuff. Intuitive requires that you learn the way color behaves, the way color affects each other, and what the relationship is on the wheel, and how these colors behave when they're mixed into each other, etc. So what happens when these are mixed together? This requires that you remember notation. You remember the systems. You know the notation. And so it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of both. But I'm hoping that gives you a little bit of clarity about the difference and maybe why I prefer the traditional wheel. Now, there are other painters, wonderful painters, who prefer the Munsell wheel, the Munsells system. So it comes down to what is your leaning. Are you more of a mathematical, shall I say, personality? Are you more of an intuitive personality? Or maybe kind of a mixture of both? Well, it wouldn't hurt to check both out. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com, where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.